I thought the hardware store was just closed. Turns out the shopkeeper was trapped inside a bugged red truck, and because of that, I couldn't buy the things I needed to progress, and I had to restart the game 3 times. Welcome back to the High Court of Games, where I, the Queen of Hearts, judge the games that enter these halls. Some are crowned victorious, others condemned to the graveyard. Today we hold the preliminary hearing of Schedule 1. Unlike a full trial where a judgment is delivered after extensive time has been spent with a game, a preliminary hearing examines a game's early evidence, first impressions, and its potential to one day stand among the victors. The goal isn't to decide whether a game is perfect, it's to answer a much simpler question. Has it done enough to deserve more of your valuable time? Because, let's face it, most of us don't have endless hours to play every game that catches our eye. The whole reason this series exists is to help you decide whether something deserves a place on your wish list or whether your time might be better spent somewhere else. The Steam page describes Schedule 1 as from small-time dope pusher to kingpin, manufacture and distribute a range of drugs throughout the grungy city of Highland Point. Expand your empire with properties, businesses, employees, and more. Honestly, that's a fair description of what the demo offers. Unfortunately, one particular bug had such a large impact on my experience, it is difficult to ignore. Eventually, I reached a point where I needed more supplies, so I headed over to the hardware store. Except, nobody was there. At first, I assumed maybe the shop simply closed on certain days. There wasn't anything in the game to suggest that was the case, but it seemed like a reasonable explanation, so I waited until the next in-game day. Still, nobody. I waited another day. Still, nobody. At that point, I was effectively stuck. At the time, I didn't know that baggies could also be purchased from the fuel station. But even if I had, things like soil and growing tents can only be bought from the hardware store, so eventually I had to stop playing and look up what was going on. Thankfully, this is a known issue within the community, so I was able to find both a cause and a solution. Apparently, the red truck that drives around outside the hardware store is actually carrying the shopkeeper to work. If the truck bugs out, the NPC never gets out, the shop never opens, and your progress comes to a complete stop. The only solution I found that worked was restarting the game. Unfortunately, this wasn't just a one-off occurrence either. Over the course of the demo, I had to restart the game at least 3 or 4 times because of it. Not all of my issues were bugs, some were simply design decisions that I found frustrating. At one point, the game asked me to buy a second growing tent. The place I wanted to put it blocked access to the first tent that I had already put down. Naturally, I assumed I'd just move the original tent. Except, I couldn't. The game doesn't actually teach you how to move furniture until much later when you're moving into a larger property, and I couldn't find anything in the controls explaining how to do it. It feels strange that such a basic mechanic was introduced so late. Personally, I think it would have made much more sense to teach players how to move furniture the first time you're asked to play something. Because how many times have you started one of these games and the first thing you place is either facing the wrong direction or you've misclicked and put it somewhere you never intended to? Unfortunately, I also ran into another bug, and while it wasn't a major game restarting issue, it was certainly irritating. This one involved the dead drop for the grower. After paying off my debt, the game simply didn't recognize that I had paid it. Now, I don't actually know what would have happened if I refused to pay again, because I simply paid the debt twice, but it was certainly more annoying than anything else at the time when it happened. Visually, Schedule 1 is really basic. There's nothing here that's going to impress anyone from a technical standpoint. That being said, I did find quite a few of the graffiti designs around the city genuinely funny. Some of them got a proper chuckle out of me, others were a bit average. But they help give the world personality. The police system is also interesting. The cops can definitely be annoying, and I suspect that's entirely the point. I do appreciate that if you're arrested, they only take the cash you're carrying. If you don't have enough money to cover the fine, they simply take whatever you've got. Honestly, it feels less like a legal fine and more like you're bribing them to look the other way. Of course, I also tried running several times. One chase lasted so long that I somehow became wanted dead or alive, which felt a little extreme. I did manage to escape once though, and I'm genuinely glad that the game gives you the opportunity instead of making capture inevitable. Towards the end of my time with the demo, I unlocked my first employee. Not long after that, the game informed me that I had reached the end of the demo. And I probably could have kept playing and experimented a little more, but it felt like a natural place to stop. Unfortunately, that also meant I never really discovered the true impact employees have on the game, and that left me wondering what the long term experience actually looks like. Because employees could become incredibly useful, or they could become a fast track to tedium. Can they also find themselves in trouble with the police? Do they eventually handle most of the day to day work for you? Because if your employees eventually remove the need for you to go out or meet buyers yourself, then the police become less of a hindrance simply because you're leaving your base of operations less and less. And that's probably my biggest question about Schedule 1. Games like this are usually all about unlocking the next thing that makes everything easier, faster, or more profitable. That's a satisfying gameplay loop. But I do wonder whether Schedule 1 eventually becomes too repetitive if you're spending most of your time at your base of operations. Buying supplies was fine, but it rarely puts you in trouble with the law. Growing the product was fine. Packaging the baggies was fine. But after a while, filling bag after bag started to become a little tedious. The question is whether the later game introduces enough new mechanics and enough meaningful decisions to keep things interesting once those systems become automated. Because if all I'm really doing is managing NPCs, I'm not entirely convinced that'll be enough to keep me engaged in the long term, which makes this one of the harder preliminary hearings the court has looked at. There's enough here to make me curious. I want to know what new systems unlock and how much larger the operation becomes. I want to know whether the later game has enough depth to justify the grind. But I also spent a significant amount of my time working around bugs, and I'm not convinced that the gameplay loop has enough variety to hold my attention. So before the court today, Schedule 1 receives a verdict of entombed. For now. Because the demo's job is to make me want to play more. Instead, this one repeatedly made me stop playing altogether. But I'd like to hear your thoughts. Does Schedule 1 deserve another chance to prove itself? Does the full game add enough depth to overcome these issues, or should today's verdict stand? Let me know in the comments below. If you'd like to check out the Schedule 1 demo for yourself, you'll find the link to the Steam page in the description. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like the video, and let me know you'd like to see more trials before the High Court of Games. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell. I'm currently on a quest to reach my first 1,000 subscribers here on YouTube, and every new adventurer who joins the court helps bring that goal a little closer. Thank you so much for your support. Court dismissed.